regulation, and how shall we find some kind of efficient regulation making markets function as best as we want them to, and who decides on what is a good and well-functioning market. So in that way, the question about market is, of course, also very, very in the core of my research. I was a bit scared when I read the title, and I also asked Christina, and what do you want us to talk about, and to define the market concept, and I'm not going to define it here. And I mean, we have had definitions, these classical definitions already up here, and I think that actually, why should we fix anything that is not broke? I mean, it's not the definition that is important, it's more that we understand how markets work and how we can increase our understanding of how markets work, which I think is the core of perhaps the discussion here. And I think that both Bruce and especially Peter rose many issues that I would like to discuss on later on. But also how actors work on the market, how do they behave on the market, how do they transact, and so on. And by doing this, which I think has been very much up for in many papers today, is one also of the cores of how economic and business historians can contribute to the discussions of the functioning of the modern markets as well. And as some here already was mentioned, that in a way that the imperfect, or what we think from a modern, not perhaps we, but people from the modern perspective think that are well modern, very well described and well-regulated markets, and they are still not always functioning well. So can we learn something from these more informal markets, more ad hoc and fragmented markets, which to provide stability and so on. Another thing which I think that we exchanged some notes or points with Martin Shanahan here when we came up from Gothenburg yesterday, and so I want he has many good slides to show. He's going to show some slides, but I think also one of the things that has been up here and which is also an important question, and this is how markets and market behavior change, and that is of course also in the core of the among the business and economic historians. And then we have, of course, the technology changes, financial innovations, new instruments, and tools to regulate. And that is what we actually, with Martin, has been studying in the competition policy, is an instrument for regulation. I'm not going to talk about it here, but how it worked in different contexts. And then we also have the discussion about how similar institutions might work very differently in different contexts, or at least on the surface they looked as the same institution, even though they are called the same, but they might not, when we scrape on the surface, they are not the same institution overall. So there are lots of things that need to be really focused and digged in and drill into the details, which are typical for people in this room. And then, of course, the role of the actors in this change process, the state, but also the individuals, the firms, and the authorities. And what we also, with Martin, have been studying is how authorities work in implementing the regulation, which affects how actually the market works. I mean, if a regulation is there, but it's not implemented, then it doesn't affect the market very much. So, as a final, I think I'm probably overdoing this again, but a few notes which I also have taken up from listening to you today, and which I think that is very important, and now I didn't remember your name. Yeah. Yes, was you were talking about the geography, because I think this is also something which is extremely important. Where are the markets, but also what are the boundaries of the market? Are they extending over time? Yes, they are. And what effects does this have? Does it make it more stable? Does it make more efficient? Or is it actually one of the reasons because of the instability? And then, of course, also the state capacity, which is extremely important over time. And then also the layers of the markets, that they were over national, international, but also local, and they exist at the same time. It's not going from the local to the global, but there are links all the time and layers all the time, and the connection and interactions between these layers, which I think are also very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna. And I think we have to introduce you new, Martin Shanahan. And you want to use a prop? Yes.
Standard system across the world, isn't it? Like the others, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak. It's wonderful to be here and meet so many people who are interested in probate records. I think I said to someone when I first did my PhD, I thought I was the only person on the planet who was interested in probate records, and certainly my friends looked at me very strangely. It's also an opportunity to meet someone who's responsible for me completing my PhD, and that's Carol Shamus, because I found one of your articles deep in the libraries at Flinders University on a hot summer's day when I was thinking that this was the end. So thank you. So a long way to get here, but thank you very much. As Susanna said, we both I have to work out how to make this work now. We both got very nervous yesterday trying to work out what we were going to say that was different from anybody else. So I'm going to skip over a couple of these slides simply because they say the obvious very quickly. We were, sorry, not speaking close enough to the microphone, about the difference between capital and money markets was something that I think is evolving. We've already spoken briefly about Polanyi and the debate. It seems to me that in the discussions today, what we have been talking about is that attribute of the connection between human beings. One of the things I say to my students in Economics 101 is humans invented markets. They sometimes don't actually get that. They think that they've been given. And so when we look at human beings and societies at different points of time, we're looking at different ways of forming those relationships, and markets is one of those things. I think Polanyi reminds us of that. But what I wanted to do, and the thing that I wanted to basically focus on, was this definition that's given by the sociologist Callan. I thought I'd be in a room with quite a few more economists, so I had my armour suit on. But what his definition does is that he really tries to open up all of the different aspects of what is involved with a market. So what they do in terms of organising conception, production, circulation of goods, what are the elements that go into that creation, and perhaps the most controversial one, the one I was waiting for something to be thrown, was talking about the confrontation of power between the people who are buying and selling. I've broken this down a little bit more because when we were talking about, well, what should we talk about today, it was about what changes over time with markets. If you pull apart that definition, which I've done here, these are the different elements of a market, all of which change over time and which are different in different societies in different periods of time. And so in terms of things to think about, but also in things to look for, or things to attempt to measure. We've got the rules and conventions, which we've had already spoken about a little bit, but technical devices by which those interactions occur, even how elements are measured in the market, whether it's by weight, whether it's by value, whether it's by gold, whether it's by nanoseconds of a machine, the competencies and the skills of the people who are involved in that market. And we've heard today some of the debate about just literacy and some of those basic elements, the degree of technical and scientific knowledge, the space where that relationship occurs, whether it's in the village square, whether it's in the parish hall, whether it's in the courtroom, whether it's in the stock exchange, and the process by which that actually works itself out in the end, whether it's by fisticuffs in a Western, or whether it's by one artificially intelligent machine talking to another artificially intelligent machine and doing the transfer in a fraction of a second. These are all elements of markets that we would recognise as created by us to facilitate interactions between us, but which change over time. And then finally, because I don't think you can talk about these sorts of things without mentioning Douglas North's work about the costs of these changes, will put him in on the bottom line, not because he's at the bottom, but because it's another element not to forget. So our thoughts were that historically we're all looking at aspects of these things, and we need to be aware of how many different dimensions can be involved when we're talking about markets. And that's obvious, that's said, that's Polanyi, and that's me finished.
So thank you very much. And now I would like to introduce Laurence Fontaine.
I'm an historian, but I moved 10 years ago in the sociology department for the challenge of the discussion. And I first studied peddlers and mountain societies, which I realized they were totally involved in credit networks, and they were paying, not paying. And because of that, I went on studying credit. And the first approach was the poor needs credit. That's the first thing you need. So how do people respond to the need of the poor in credit? So basically, I've been studying peddlers, credit, market, and poverty. And this helps you to understand the kind of question, the three angles I'm going to address the market in these 5 minutes. The first one is to speak of the market in singular, the market. And then you need to have definition. If you go back to the definition that you find in the dictionary in the Middle Ages in France, the first definition states, the market is the fixing of a price after discussion. And I really underline after discussion, because this is what it is about. Afterward, they would incorporate the place in which the market stands. But if you're a bit familiar with Europe in early modern time, which was a status-based society, you immediately understand that the aristocrats are not going to discuss price, because they need to assert their authority and their preeminence in every acting of their lives. Therefore, the market is a dynamite stick under status-based society. And this is one of the main struggles all over early modern times. And so this is the first thing I wanted to stress. And it's a battle against the market in any kind of status-based society, be it based on politics. In the former Soviet society, they just couldn't stand the market, be it in a caste society. So there is really something which is at stake there. The second is to speak of the market in the plural. And then you need to study the different markets. And then you see immediately that they have different logics. They're not all working along the same logic. And especially the financial markets, they are first the fuel of the rest of the economy, and they work in contradiction with the rest of the other markets. Because the financial markets wants to make profit, so they need to lower the cost of the working market and all kind of other markets. So this is something to reflect on. And then the last point would be to say that it's a bit something that you've said, that the market is a stake. And when I was studying, poverty and market, I understood that you could write the history of the market in early modern time by saying that it's the history of the expulsion of the poor out of the market, so to speak. Now they're trying to get back again today. But so the market is a stake. And to understand, everybody wants to grab the market for itself. And then you have to understand, to study the rulers of the game, to whom they are designed for, who is losing, who is gaining, how can you, what the margin of, that the people can play with those rules. And how does conflict are solved? What are the rules of the game to solve the conflict? And again, what are the punishments for economic delinquency? And well, it's all these kind of questions that I think that is really at the core of the study of the market. Singular, plural, and the market is a stake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give the word to Erik Lakama.
I could actually start with saying thanks for inviting me, despite I'm the director of the Institute for Economic and Business History Research in Stockholm, because I'm not an organizer of this conference. I could, if you like the conference, you shouldn't thank me, you should thank the organizers. And I don't do research on 18th century credit, but I do more recent stuff primarily on business history, but also some political economy work. But markets are important in these fields as well. And some of these classic topics have been already mentioned. When was markets established? What is a market? And I'm gonna give some random thoughts on I probably can't answer the question what a market is. And I think there are lots of definitions. Some of them are not very useful. Some are somewhat more useful, but they don't capture what this is all about. And I could go back to what the major field of economics. The economist Ludwig von Mises wrote a book in 1948 or something called Human Action. And he also suggested that you should rename the subject economics into human action, because economics is human action. Okay, that makes sense, but it didn't happen. We still call it economics. Because if there are other subjects that are also human action. We could get rid of like history, sociology, psychology, anthropology, political science, and call that human action as well. And then the term is not very good because there is still a value to talk about economics compared to, say, psychology or history. So, and the same goes with markets. So you could argue that markets have always existed. That is correct. In one respect, I actually forgot who said it, that what could be defining characteristics of like modern humans is the ability and propensity to barter and to make intertemporal agreements, which will allow markets. So probably markets existed for like 300,000 years or something. We could also say that the market is only like a Walrasian auction, and then we probably can't find any markets. So it's something in between, and we need to be quite accurate what we mean. I don't think that we should say that this is outside the market or inside the market, because it doesn't really make sense. In business history, there's a concept called non-market strategy, which is like corporations do things to increase their profits or their long-term viability by acting outside the organized markets, but a non-market strategy is obviously on the political market, for example. So non-market strategy could be in market as well. We also talk about markets that are not dependent on explicit prices. We talk about marriage markets. Values exist, but we don't quote them in lists in newspapers or on web pages. So you could discuss, is this definition that prices are established the definition of a market? Yes, prices are established, but you can't see the prices explicitly. There are other markets that work in the same fashion. Further, you can also use the tools used to analyze, like what we call markets in everyday language, to analyze these markets, like the marriage market. That's possible. That's what you do in public choice analysis, which also makes sense. On the other hand, we could, there are other economists or economic historians claiming that you could differentiate between market transaction and like command and control, like the quotient within a firm and outside a firm, which is contracts versus like coercion or top-down control, which also don't really make sense in all situations, because every market transaction have some degree of coercion, could be at least. Because you could also state, if you look at the establishment of a price, you could see, even though this is something that most people would, or probably no one, would call a market transaction, is that someone is pointing a gun at me and saying, give me a wallet or I kill you. We could establish a price that my life is more valuable to me than to you, and your wallet is more important to you than me. We agree, the market clears. This is not a market transaction, but we established a price. So probably you should analyze markets in a different fashion and see, and you could also connect this to this, when did they emerge, when are market relevant as a tool, means of analysis of, for example, historical credit, is, for example, the degree of coercion. You could argue that a market transaction is entered voluntarily, which this robbery situation is not, because I didn't enter that voluntarily, he did, I didn't. Because I wanted to benefit from it. I might not benefit from it, but it's just about my intention to benefit from it. Then we have a market transaction. You could also see that market transaction needs to be uncoerced or voluntarily, which can't be, this definition can't be used of everything that we call markets today. We could also see that, for example, that markets, if you look at the Polanyi definition of markets that we mentioned by Bruce, that markets are very recent phenomenon. This is probably not true in the sense that market exists. There are lots of examples of like market behavior long before the modern economy. That is pretty obvious. But we could see that we have two different kinds of markets. We have like emergent order markets that have existed for, yeah, I should say at least thousands of years. But we could have organized markets that are more recent phenomenon. And we could see a switch from emergent order markets. We could have market-like transaction between what Polanyi would define as outside the markets. For example, these client-related transactions between, for example, a feudal lord and his vassal, which included a monetary transaction, a price, but it was not driven by normal market mechanisms. We could also see in households that you borrow from your father. Most people would not call that a transaction in the market, but it could be, it's definitely not an organized transaction, but we have organized markets as well, which is that. So these are my thoughts then. You don't find a clear definition, but you have some ideas what you should look for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now it's Martin Iversen.
It works?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, so this is a late afternoon and a large panel, and I'm the last presenter, so I will really do my best to do it short. And in order to do that, I have cheated a little bit, like the people on TV when they have the chef's kitchen. I've already prepared some things over here. and you know, when I'm working at CBS, Copenhagen Business School, for too long, 18 years. No, I enjoy to be there. I've been there for 18 years, and at least half of the time I have been looking at Danish capitalism, trying to understand how Danish capitalism have developed over time. And obviously, if you look at capitalism, then the market concept is critical to understand. And spending this time on it, I have tried to come up over time, of course, with some sort of a concept, a model for understanding the changes of markets in capitalism Usually I would use around 45 minutes at least to present this concept. Now I have late afternoon, 5 minutes, but I have cheated a bit, so maybe that can help me. But the idea here is to look at two factors that are basically based upon the factors that are used in sort of the grounded economic theory for markets. One would be that any market you would look at between, so the horizontal here, between the restricted economic transactions and the unrestricted economic transactions. So you can take any market at any time, and then you can place it somewhere and such. You can say, I looked at the beer market in Copenhagen, and I could say it started completely unrestricted in the mid-18th, 19th century, and then it moved gradually towards becoming more restricted and then back again. So any market at any time, you can kind of move it in that direction. So this is obviously what people, neoliberal people who are interested in economics would be interested in looking at economic transactions. But as has also been mentioned earlier here, we should definitely, and this is the knowledge from economic sociology, and this is something I learned, I was at UC Berkeley and spending time with Neil Flickstein and his group on architecture of markets, that really this doesn't make sense. Of course there will be actors in markets, and there will be actors who are saying, well, we will try to get emphasis, we will be the ones who are defining these economic transactions. So the other way we look at it will be between private actors and public actors, or between the private sector and the state. And combining these two kind of gives us